We're going to take a look at the AutomationDirect DN-WS wire stripper. And this is actually a wire stripper and a cutter. So you can see at the bottom here, there is a wire cutter. So you can use that to cut a wire or a cable. However, I tend to use this cutter here for cutting the cables instead because it gives me a better idea of how much I'm cutting off. It's just easier to visualize. On the other hand, now whereas this wire stripper and cutter can be used to strip wire insulation off of a wire, I prefer to use this one because it gives you finer control over how much insulation you're stripping off. As you can see here, there's a gauge that shows you how much you're going to strip off, and this is in millimeters. And by the way, you can see here 28 to 12 AWG, American wire gauge. So 28 is inversely proportional to wire size. So 28 is very small, 12 is quite large. In our system, most of what we have is 22 gauge. So it's able to strip the insulation off of wires that are of that range of size or diameter. So if we want to, let's say we want to cut off 7 millimeters of insulation, set that to 7, and then you can see there's a little backstop, this black thing in the back there, which this is what keeps it at a certain distance, the cutter at a certain distance from the end of the wire. So this is how we know we're going to cut off 7 millimeters. And we just clamp down here and just pull the handle. And you usually want to hold the wire a little bit. It does have these teeth here, which is intended to hold the wire as this pulls back to cut the insulation off, but often you end up having to hold the wire a little bit. So you can see, I'll try to do it slowly here so you can see what happens. So as you pull the handle down, it closes the blade and then it pulls it back. So that's what actually pulls the insulation off. So you can see here it does a very good job of cutting the insulation and then pulling it back, and it actually usually leaves it on here, which is good because if you're not going to immediately connect this wire to something, it keeps the strands from kind of going all over the place like this. You want to keep them together. So that's how that works. And the other adjustment you can make is here up at the top. You see a minus sign and a plus sign. So if I have a wire with a lot of insulation, so if the red part was very thick, you can see here it's really thin. But if it was very thick, then I would move this over here to the plus because I'm going to need more pressure on the insulation to cut it off. In this case, it seemed to work fine. A couple notches from the left, from the plus side. And before you cut a whole lot of these, you want to make sure that it is at the right setting, because if we make it apply too much pressure to the insulation, it may not have happened here, but yeah, this actually looks fine. But sometimes you'll see if it's very thin insulation, it'll actually cut through some of the strands, and it's important that you keep all the strands. You don't want to cut any of them. And then on the opposite end of the spectrum, if it's too loose, or if it's not tight enough, then what will happen is that it is not going to cut the insulation off. All right, so you can see here that it's not cutting it off at all. If we make it a little bit tighter, it might start to make some sort of a mark on the insulation, but it's not quite cutting through it. So we need to move a little further to the left. And eventually we get to the point where it's the right tension. All right, so that's how to use the DN-WS wire stripper.